Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Paul Howarth, CEO and founder of Pansensic. I'm kind of like the ideas person behind Pansensic technology, and that's about all I am really. But yeah, thank you.
Way more than that, Paul. Way more. Mel.
Hi, I'm Mel Venner. I'm director at Instinct Performance, and my background is neuroscience and behavioural science. I've spent over a decade in recruitment, and my whole thing is I'm just fascinated with why we do what we do, and how we can tap into that to increase performance. So that's me.
Thank you very much, Mel. And we'll move to Liz, please.
Hi guys, my name's Liz, Mulhall-Brewer. I've been in recruitment for 10 years, co-founder of Elizabeth Scott. I've been mainly in an internal recruitment setting, so wellbeing, culture, engagement has always been kind of within my remit. Currently training to be a business psychologist, really interested in the positive psychology of organisations. So this ties in really well with the sort of work that I plan to do in the future.
Fabulous, thanks Liz. And on to Jo, please.
Morning everybody, my name is Jo Gregory. I own a company called Trainwreck. I've been in recruitment or recruitment training now for just over 16 years. So I'm a recruitment trainer and I'm also a psychological skills mentor.
Thank you very much, Jo. Love the company name, by the way, that is awesome. And Chris, by no means last, well you are last, but by no means least. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Barry. Delighted to be here. 22 years recruitment experience. Now I'm a leadership, performance and wellbeing coach.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So that's everyone in the panelists. We'll move over back to where we started with them, with Paul.
That's great. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you ever so much to everybody that's joined me on this panel. It's fantastic. It's a real privilege, to be honest. So thank you, and thank you for everybody for joining. So I'll just move my thing out of the way. So what we're going to be talking about today is all about maintaining culture and well-being in this new world we find ourselves in. We'll talk a little bit about the landscape, a little bit about how we engage with the workforce now in this changing landscape, then look at some of the HR challenges, and then a Q&A and a summary at the end. So that's what's going to happen. So the landscape, well, this is an American stats. 62% of people are now working from home, probably something similar in this country. 98% of people want to work at home at least some of their time. So that's a huge number of people. This isn't going to change in a hurry, I don't think. Loads of reasons why people love working from home. It gives us all freedom. If we got children to look after, it's a godsend. It's difficult, but it's a godsend. One of the big things, I spoke to a guy the other day and said, I just love the fact that I'm not in the car and traveling for 3 hours a day every day. So loads of benefits. There's benefits to society, and you know, 67% of employees would consider leaving their job if they couldn't maintain this flexible working. So lots of really plus points. But you know, there are the other side of that as well. So that there are, you know, issues at working at home. That there's, for some of us, it does take a toll on our mental health and our relationships. And maybe there's other things going on. Maybe some prejudice. Maybe some difficult to break down barriers. That kind of thing. Who knows? So the actual landscape of it all is. This isn't going to go back in a hurry. People like working from home. They want that flexibility. And if there's one good thing that's come out of COVID, perhaps it's that it's a little bit more flexible way of working, and we broke some barriers very quickly in some organisations. But there are some issues, and there are some challenges. And you know, it's like everything. When you first start something, it can be a bit rosy. That can be that honeymoon period, and after a while it can sort of start to get tougher. One of the big changes, obviously, is when we've got people working from home. How do we engage with our workforce? I think personally it was hard to engage before, and now with this remote working, it's even harder. So maybe if I could ask the panel their views on how engagement was happening and how engagement is happening now. Chris, have you got a thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it was obviously easier before the pandemic. You could have those one-to-ones, you know, managing the individual, not the team. Really kind of look them in the eye, look at their body language, and you know, you could have internal scorecards, look at their outside influences, and just, you know, it's very much the culture of we, not I. Not asking someone to do something you're not prepared to do yourself, and just building that team culture. Anyone else?
Just to add to that, I think before there were lots of people who were maybe unconsciously building engagement in their teams, well or not so well. But all of the things that Chris described there around body language and getting people together, some leaders sort of instinctively can feel when the energy in the room has dropped, or can instinctively feel, and they probably wouldn't be able to necessarily articulate or consciously form. I think before COVID it was easier, but I think lots of people still struggled. Whereas now, even the people who intuitively could read a room and figure out, okay, we need to have conversations, how do we shift our communication? There's now obviously this additional barrier where the things that they relied upon before so unconsciously, people are having to be very aware and conscious of the way that they're engaging people and the methods available to them to do that. And it's horses for courses, you know. I think what works for some people, as we've said before, in terms of even just home working, doesn't necessarily work for everybody. So what was already, I think, only quite a new area for leaders to focus on, consciously working on engaging with their employees, has just become slightly trickier for lots of people.
I think that's right as well. I think with a Zoom meeting, it can be staged, or the person can be prepared, so it might not necessarily be a true reflection of actually how they're feeling. So there's that to look at as well. And as you say, it's harder to read their real emotions and their real thoughts and feelings.
From the research that I've done, Gallup have found that 70% of engagement comes from management, and engagement with the team comes from the managers. So are managers currently equipped to remotely manage people? Do they know what they're doing? I think there's going to be some gaps around how to actually manage remotely as well to keep those engagement levels high.
I think that's a really key point, actually. One of the things that we've certainly been finding is, particularly at the beginning of lockdown, you know, managers were having to sort of feel their way around how to manage remotely. There's no rule book really. So I think the more support that businesses can give to managers to help them to manage properly, that's going to avoid that staff burnout, but it's also going to avoid management burnout when they're second guessing what they're doing and whether it's the right course of action.
And so what sort of how are they reaching out and engaging at the moment? What's your feeling from the ground floor on that?
I think it's things like doing voice notes rather than text messages, FaceTime rather than calls, you know, that kind of interaction, Zooms rather than just the general call. I've heard companies breaking into work bubbles of 6 and doing kind of team stuff around like that, synchronized pizza afternoons, giving everyone an equal, so if you're on a Zoom call, giving everyone an equal opportunity to actually speak, because if you're on a Zoom call, sometimes you can get lost in other people's, you know, comments. Maybe in things like having company branding at home as well, so they feel part of that company culture a little bit. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've noticed, which has kind of been a gift in this environment, is again that shift to consciously engaging people. People are devoting a lot more of their time in weekly roundups or in their Slack channels or WhatsApp groups to talk about wins and positivity, which I think if they were in the office, it's sort of if no one's complaining, everything's fine. And if you look at the conversations that people were having around performance, it was sort of neutral or bad. Whereas I think a lot more conscious effort is now being given to the amount of airtime that people are talking about their wins, what's going well, but also making sure that in these weekly wrap-ups or daily stand-ups, whatever it might be in the business, I think I am seeing a lot more of a concerted effort to talk about not work stuff, and how are people finding things, which I don't think was necessarily happening with the same level of regularity before.
Yeah, sort of weekly check-ins around anything other than work. I've seen that quite a lot, actually.
That's so important to have that kind of offline chat as well as the online chat. Zoom is so official, isn't it? You know, I don't know if I would bare my soul to my manager on a Zoom call, because someone somewhere is probably recording, or you know, it's sort of kept forever. You have to have, I think, official and then unofficial, informal channels for people to talk. Because also this is about people being able to talk with their colleagues as well as their managers, where you would normally maybe sit in an office and be able to talk quite freely with people. When you're sat on your own in your house, it can be a really isolating place. So having those multiple channels that people can choose which channel they want to use to communicate based on the formality of whatever they're going to say, I think that's really important. But then also from a business's point of view, to make sure that they're managing those channels correctly as well. You know, to make sure that they do have official channels for official company information.
I think as well, just to finish the point off, I think, you know, because the leaders are going through COVID as well, they're experiencing what their people are experiencing. So I think that's helped with their approach to how they engage with their people, because we're kind of all in the same storm but in a different boat. So I think that actually helps.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, that kind of leads me into the next slide. So this is something that we're very aware of at Pansensic, because some of you may know, but we analyze text. So if it's on a survey, bottom of a survey, we analyze text, or it can be chatbot comments, it can be email traffic, it can be workplace social media. A lot of the stuff that we've been talking about just now would sit in the top right-hand corner of this 2x2 matrix, which is great communication, face-to-face, where you get a feel for body language, you get a much purer communication. And what we're replacing it with, which is things that aren't as good, and we have to be very, very mindful of that, and try and find ways of keeping that quality conversation going as much as possible. Some of the worst data that we get is a survey, and it's a poorly thought out survey, or where the question is very closed, or very leading. And if we rely on that kind of thing, then, you know, we're going to struggle to keep in contact with our employees, and we'll have a growing disconnect. So that's just a little bit about the quality of the text data we see as Pansensic. So just quickly, what we do is we get text information from all different sources. It could be social media, it could be online forums, it could be continuous listening apps, it could be surveys, it could be a multitude of places, internal data, external data to the organization. It goes into one big data file, and from that we use our technology to actually try and understand what's going on in all that text, that unstructured text. And we find the themes. Nearly all the things we look for, we build from the bottom up. So we look for the themes that are actually in the text and create a picture of what's going on. So that's kind of what we do. And why that's relevant to this conversation now is that over the last month or so, well, actually 6 months, we've been tracking some of the analysis, employee comments of what's been going on. So we've been looking at 17,600 in this particular data set, online forums, employee surveys, and an always on continuous listening app. That's 500,000 words, just short of 500,000 words. So I can't show you the comments people are talking about, because they, you know, some of it is for organizations, some of it is online. So you can see this particular slide, there's some online comments. So that's how we build a picture of the insights and observations that we see in real data from employees.
Paul, can I ask you a quick question on that?
Sure.
Have you seen a difference between the internal versus the external comments at all?
Yeah, there typically is a difference. If people put stuff online, especially in the consumer space, it is probably more honest than if you solicit the responses. So I'm not so sure it's the same with employee, because there's not so many places to put employee stuff online. It's just a few places. So there's a little bit different there, but certainly the continuous listening is completely different to the data we see in a survey, for instance. The continuous listening becomes much more brutally honest sometimes.
I would have thought that, because I guess if it's internal, sorry to interrupt you, if it's internal, there's a sense that it might be tainted by the company way of talking, or it might be kind of reacted or forced to be presented in a certain way, perhaps. But whereas if it's online, there's probably no bias or no sort of...
It goes back to what Joe said a little while ago. You know, we don't really want to, you know, say what we feel sometimes. You know, we might be guarded of what we say, or we might be trying to give the answer that you know the survey wants to hear, kind of thing. And so it is. We do see all sorts of skews on data, but when you put all of it into the same pot from multiple perspectives, you do get a great aggregation going on, and you get to what's really happening. Okay, so what we try to do is, in every area we work in, is try to understand the emotions of the employee or the customer or the patient. And the big one is we're trying to understand what are their frustrations, because if we can remove their frustrations, they will naturally become happier. If you don't remove frustrations, and people live with frustrations for a long time, they become angry. And we see that all the time. Is it, you know, if you can keep talking about the same frustrations, in the end you get fed up and you get a bit teasy. So we're also looking to identify people's desires, what they want and need, and that's a really important emotion. So a desire emotion is a future state emotion. So you've not yet got that. You're not yet there. You want something that you haven't currently got. So that's a great way of understanding what you need to do. And the aim and the objective of all this emotion analytics is to delight and excite our customers or our workforce. Because if you can do all those three things, you take away the frustrations and you meet the needs, what you do, you can't help but improve retention, recruitment, efficiency, effectiveness. And you can't help but increase productivity, because the answers are there. The why information from how you can improve, it's all there. So that's a little bit about the emotion lens. And then we apply the emotion lens over the various topics within the conversation. And we know we've got something like 50 topics that keep reoccurring across all the organizations we've worked with over the last 15 or so years. They will change in some organizations. Things are more important than the others. Interestingly, salary is never at the top. Salary is kind of like a third the way down pretty much all the time. Communication is nearly always at the very top. And morale and motivation is always something that's talked about a lot as well. So we're looking at all sorts of things here that happen in the organisation to get a feel for what those topics of conversation are and how important it is. Some of the stuff you will be very familiar with, some of the stuff is perhaps less familiar, but when you then apply the frustrations, say, over the topics of conversation, you can see where you need to work, and that's the way Pansensic works. But for today's webinar, we've just used it as a tool to uncover a few insights and a few observations that we're going to talk through. One of the, perhaps I find this one particularly interesting. This is an always-on tracking of employee experience. It's a UK business unit of a global company where all the employees are now working from home. They weren't working from home before. To begin with, great. You can see the purple line there is the emotion positivity. It took a dive into June, And you can see from June onwards, it started to, the red line sort of indicates it started to improve. And if you look at the frustration levels, June time, 34% of the comments were the emotion in the comments were talking about frustration. That started to improve in the August period, 26%, and more recently down to 13, which is pretty much what we would see typically. The interesting thing for me is excitement was high earlier on in the year at 9%, and that dipped right away. So we've yet to see it, you know, this excitement of working from home. It's new, it's different, you know, it does give us something, but that's slipping away. So whether that sort of is an indication that perhaps working from home in the future may not be so rosy as it has been, you know, so far, I don't know. You have to see that.
Paul, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
You know, I find this fascinating, and I'm already now starting to think, do we think that there could be external factors that are influencing this sort of group frustration? So I'm trying to chart the COVID lockdowns into these peaks and troughs to see if that's something that maybe you've got a bit of a herd mentality going on, that actually when you know there's a lockdown coming, people's frustration tends to peak, or, you know, when they're let out again. Is that got anything to do with it? Or
yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think it does have something to do with it. It's kind of that external influence. You know, none of us can walk away from that. We're all touched, and it was great to hear what you said, Chris, about, you know, even managers are touched by the same problem, which is we're all in the same boat. Yeah. However, what I would say is the company in question, I know, was specifically looking at frustrations to resolve. So they've purposely gone about trying to resolve those frustrations. So a bit of both, I would say, Joe, to be honest. Okay. We found a bunch of insights and observations. You know, everybody's going to say, wow, I knew this, I knew that. With insights, what we say is, you know, we can give you 10 insights. You will know 7, but there's 3 of them you might not know or you might not be aware of. So I'm not saying any of this is groundbreaking, but it's here to build our discussion around. So the first, if you like, group of observations is all about communications, and we've had a few conversations there already about the number of meetings, the fact that some people feel they're presented to rather than in a proper discussion. Some people are just saying, you know, I just put it on and just sort of put my feet up and turn the camera off and, you know, see what happens. So there's all sorts going on there in that communications, that conference call world. Something that popped up quite early for me, and because my world is all about innovation, was those water cooler moments that disappeared, the sparks that we get when we're in those groups, talking together and bouncing off each other and getting excited and having a laugh. And because, you know, innovation is about fun, creativity is about being in a fun frame of mind. So that's definitely something that we're picking up as actually quite a weak signal. The face-to-face is a strong signal. So, you know, we all miss those face-to-face conversations, whether it's a customer, whether it's a friend, a colleague, that support. And I think from a mental health point of view, the face-to-face support and the banter, you know, we all like banter. Nobody likes banter more than me. I encourage it, probably get in a bit of trouble now and again, but, you know, we all like a bit of banter. So the first thing is about communication. I've sort of set the scene in that. So, but perhaps if I could throw it to the panel and get a bit of feedback on that one.
Yeah, I think just of what you've said there, so many Zoom meetings, I think the first thing I'd like to add on this is there is a balance between under and over communicating. And I think sometimes over communication, because you've not got context, because what you've got is your manager on the phone to you saying what's happening with this, and if all they've got are the stats, that's all the conversation is really about. Once you've done your obligatory how are you, if you over communicate, and yes, I'm the same as I was when you asked me 10 minutes ago, it can feel like micromanagement, and you can actually do more harm. So there is a sweet spot and balance around communication. And to that point, I get that this is probably not what you wanted me to say, but I think it's important to talk about that. In terms of idea generation, I do believe that it's an obligation of organisations, of leaders, to provide safe spaces to have those conversations in. So there needs to be an element of redundancy in the system where people feel as though they have the time to have those conversations, that it's actually productive to not be productive 100% of the time. And I know Chris and I talk about this a lot, slowing down to speed up, but I think having safe spaces where your manager's not necessarily stood over your shoulder, or it's not going to come back to bite you at some point, that you feel as though you have the safety to explore without ramification later on, is really important. Otherwise, I think what you'll find is you'll either get people clamming up when it comes to communication, or you'll see with frightening consistency just a compliance and a lack of variety of what people say. That's just a uniform way of saying things, and you're going to force this out of me, so I'll just say the company line. So I think with communication, there's an element of, is there the freedom to be completely honest, and safe spaces to do that, and also how often are we encouraging those kinds of conversations to take place?
I agree with that. And also, just to add to that, the whole toxic positivity thing around just being positive for positive's sake and actually not getting under the skin of it, that can be a problem around communication as well. I think, was it you, Joe, that put a post out about that, or was it someone else? I can't remember.
I don't know. I'll take the credit. If no one else is going to stick their hand up, I'll say it was me. But I agree. Do you know what? Actually, things aren't all right, are they? I think what some of the best leaders of businesses that I've seen in this pandemic have been those that have been very honest with their staff and said, look, we don't know the answers, we don't really know what's coming, but we're going to try our best, and we're in it together. And that collective responsibility around, we don't know what's coming, because actually, firstly, it's exhausting for leaders to sit there with this veneer that everything's fantastic, and people don't believe it. So everyone just say, yes, it's all very you're right, that sort of fake positivity, that toxic positivity, it's not altogether helpful. And honesty, I think, is the best policy, particularly in businesses. I've seen exactly what you were saying earlier on. People are just zoomed out, being broadcast on a Zoom. It's great because we need to communicate what's happening with the business, and the easiest way to do that is to the masses. But one of the ways that I've seen that toxicity kind of come into play is when you've got like an organization on a Zoom call, and there's all these WhatsApp channels, messages underneath the meeting that's going on, negatively referring to what's happening in the meeting. And I find that really I don't know how you stop that. I don't know if you can. I don't know if that's just part of the course. People feel the need to be, maybe it's tribal. They need to, or maybe it's because they're not getting enough bespoke communication. But I see that a lot, these WhatsApp messages living underneath big meetings. And I find that quite fascinating.
Also as well, this whole kind of compassion, emotion-led understanding of people's people. I think it needs to start at the top as well. So I think where companies fall down actually is they come up with something like this or whatever it is, and it goes from the sort of directors down. But I think it should be from the absolute top first down. So no, we're all in the same boat. And if the leaders go through it as well, everyone's going to cascade down properly. I think that's a really key point. This isn't just for the people on the ground.
Liz, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, mine's slightly unrelated, but more around redundancies and communication regarding that. So a lot of the candidates that I've been speaking to have unfortunately been made redundant, and I guess how they felt about the business really depended on the level of communication. And some of the candidates that I know that were made redundant felt so positive about their business as they were exited out because of the level of communication they received, whereas others just kept in the dark. It's just so unknown. So I think there's been a real mix of how companies have communicated plans for furlough, redundancies, etc., just to make them feel more stable in their role. So I think, yeah, there's been a real mix from the candidates I've been speaking to.
Yeah, really interesting that. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide. One of the things, Joe, you said about putting your phone, your WhatsApp out the way. I put my phone out the way. Now I don't know what time it is. So how am I doing for time?
I don't know. I've got my phone on either. I was just messaging Mel.
Okay.
35 past.
Okay, so we need to move on a little bit quicker, perhaps. Okay, management and coordination. Many managers find it a real challenge. Some, it just goes against their whole nature. Some really responding to it and meeting those challenges very well. Comments, a lot of comments about, you can kind of see the conscientious people really overdoing it at home. Don't know where to draw the boundary, don't know how to switch off. And possibly the unconscientious are not overdoing it. You know, if there's nobody looking over their shoulder, perhaps they perhaps taking the mickey a bit, who knows. One of the big worries for me is this working from home. I've read so many comments about lying in bed with a cup of tea and a biscuit on my laptop, and I'm thinking, oh my God, you can kind of tell these people are a lot younger than me, which most people are, because if they were my kind of age, your posture would be screaming at you, don't do that. So that this posture, this health and safety at home is a big issue that I don't know that we're addressing that well. Another big worry that is feeding into the conscientious overdoing it is the fact that actually, because we're all working from home now, that means that my company can outsource my job to another country where labor is a third of the price. And this is putting a lot of pressure on people. I can read it in the comments and you can feel it. So there's a few things there. Have anybody got any comments on these?
I think this is so important. All of these things psychologically, and I think this is a real challenge for people working from home, managing people working from home, and actually physically working from home. I know in the initial honeymoon period, it's brilliant. You know, I can walk around in my pajamas and I can, do what I want when I want. But actually, what I found personally and I've worked from home for a number of years. I haven't sat in an office for about 15 years, but even I felt it. I felt that actually, and also people have got children around when the schools weren't in, it was a really difficult time. I don't think people gave themselves enough credit for how difficult it was. I don't think people are working from home. I think they are attempting to work from home with a pandemic going on and children and dogs and maybe 7 other people in the building with them. So I don't think it's as cut and dry as some of us make out it is. But actually, psychologically, after the honeymoon period wore off, I found it very, very important to create psychological parameters for myself at work. So I would physically go out of the house and commute back to my house again because I needed it. And once I'd recognized that I needed that psychological safety net in place, I then could put more psychological safety nets in place. And actually, employees all over the country have lost their psychological safety nets. And as a manager, I think a really good exercise is to identify what did they have before that made them feel safe, and what could we help people to put back in place, even if it's just in recruitment, it's a sales board, it's a tally of your interviews, it's if you don't have that in front of you and you don't have a desk and you're hanging off your sofa listening to Loose Women, psychologically, I'm just not sure you're in that place for high performance anymore. So that's an exercise that I recommend to all businesses. Look at psychological safety nets and what could you put in place for them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And when it becomes,
yeah, that's so important.
Go on, Mel. Go on, Mel.
I was going to say that's so important with the psychological safety nets. And I've long talked about how it's actually the gap between reality and expectations, or the gap between reality and boundaries, that causes that frustration and that anger that you talked about before, Paul. And so being honest and closing those down about what you know, what you don't know, what the expectations are. And one of the things that I think we need to help leaders with, because we talked about how people are feeling their way around this, and they go, yeah, this sounds great, guys, but I have no idea how you would actually start to put these things in place. I think you made a really good point there, Joe, about asking people and looking at the data and figuring out what was there before and how can we replicate that. And then another thing which I think is really useful is about synchronous experiences. So people who are in the office experiencing things at the same time as people who aren't in the office. And I'm a big advocate of biohacks. My friend recently thought I'd lost my mind because I got a Himalayan salt lamp and essential oil diffuser, and she's like, my friend the scientist, what's happened to you? But actually, you know, I've got cues for my brain as to when I'm meant to be alert and doing work, and the light is different and it smells different and the air is a different temperature and all of these things, that actually smells go straight into your emotional part of the brain, not the way that the rest of your senses are processed. So in terms of being able to relax and actually give my brain that break at the end of the day, and then also knowing, right, I need to sharpen up. There are tips and toolbox tricks that actually, if you let people know what they are, and if they are provided by businesses to support people to make what is, like you say, I don't think we're giving ourselves enough credit for what quite a shift this is. And then it becomes more complex when some people are doing it, some people are not. People's circumstances are so very different, despite the fact we're going through this all together. I think a lot of it is down to the resources and how those resources really benefit people, so that then you've got this collective sense of identity and these shared reference points that everybody can get on board with.
That's right. I think there's routine, but also variety is important. I spoke to a couple of clients yesterday around making sure they're even working from in a different room each day, having a different theme each day, and just trying to make sure it's not Groundhog Day. Also, I think there's a play around businesses ensuring that employees do have the right equipment and the right setup. So maybe even providing the right chairs or the right desks, all that kind of stuff is really, really important. And it doesn't have to be 9 to 5 as well. I think that's dying, because ordinarily if you're in the office, it's normally 9 to 5. But I don't see any reason why productivity can't happen in the hours that suit the individual. So there's all these factors that are really important, I think.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Liz, got any comments on that one?
No, only with jobs, I think mobilising the workforce in the UK isn't a bad thing. I have spoken to a few clients that are looking to hire outside of the regions that they usually would consider. So I think that's a bit of a plus, but not anything else.
Okay, so we'll move on to the final group of observations. We've kind of been heading this way a little bit all morning. The psychosocial stuff, as I call it. You know, so this can be where people feel overly monitored, overly pressured from somebody looking over the shoulder. Belonging and teamwork, I can see so many comments about how there's a slow disconnect, gradual disconnect from what it was before to where it's going. And that's quite worrying from my point of view, as somebody that's really interested in the emotions of the workforce. The feeling belonging is fundamental to nearly all of us. It's right at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy needs, so it's that important. The other one I come across, which I thought was fascinating, was, you know, onboarding. How does that happen these days? You know, how do we make that happen? Onboarding to what? It's very difficult, I would imagine, to come into a new organization and get into that organization by the Zoom kind of approach. Culture, you know, I mean, you guys can talk about that 10 times more than me, but I kind of look at it as a petri dish, and a culture is contained within the organization. But all of a sudden, if everybody's outside of the petri dish, instead of there being one petri dish, there's 500, there's 1,000 petri dishes, and where does culture fit in that? How do we keep it going? How do we stop it falling to pieces? How do we steer it the way we want to steer it? It begs so many questions. And finally, for me, an area, a really key area for me is mental health. It's one of the 4 domains that we work in: consumer, patient, employee, mental health, and society. And mental health, I'm going to say this stat because it hit me in the face yesterday. The biggest killer of male and females under the age of 35. That's staggering. And, you know, we're living in this world where, you know, mental health is getting a big problem. Now, you would think that COVID-19 has had a negative effect on mental health, but the stats that I've been reading, and I'm not a lover of believing stats, because you know, you can have stats for say this and that, but they're saying there's not had a big impact on mental health and suicide rates. So, well, particularly suicide rates. So there's a lot going on in this one, and I know it's a pet topic for everybody on the panel. So would somebody like to kick off with their thoughts on the psychosocial?
Just with the suicide rates, I was looking them up the other day, and they've not actually been released from the Office of National Statistics yet. So I think there's a huge gap in the data. But I think once they have been released, sort of Jan, Feb next year, we're really going to see the impact. I'm very passionate about mental health and have set up a couple of groups myself, and I can just see it being such a huge issue, and it's only going to get worse. And I think organisations don't really understand how to deal with it, what interventions to do, and I think, yes, it's a huge problem.
Do we even understand on a personal level? It's very difficult. It's, you know, I've had periods of my life when I've struggled with mental health, and I've learned to develop coping mechanisms, coping strategies, but nearly all those coping strategies are torn down by this COVID, working from home and not being able to socialise. So it's a difficult one, isn't it?
I think it is, and I think that going back to sort of my main theme is we absolutely need to encourage people to bring their whole selves and to be honest about what, you know, we can't help if we don't know, and people need to feel safe and able to do that. But I think we're setting managers and leaders up for a hefty challenge if we're not equipping them of how to have those conversations. And I think that needs to be the priority, because people can have the best intentions and say, oh, you'll be all right, just crack on, just do this, and actually it can compound an issue and can also close the door for future communication where they feel, well, all right, mate, I actually reached out to you and I felt as though that was slapped down, so I'm probably not going to do that again because I felt a bit silly. So I think the priority needs to be equipping managers with proper frameworks as to how to respectfully have conversations around mental health and how things are going, because at the same time as well, I think we also need to respect that some people might not want to disclose to their managers the deepest, darkest, you know, my marriage is falling apart and this is going on for my mum, etc. So, you know, again, as with everything, it is about a balance. It's about creating an environment where people feel if they want to, that they can have conversations like that they will be conversations that are handled respectfully, and that managers don't freak out and have, you know, these because if you're put on the spot and you're not expecting it, it can be terrifying if you've not been given the tools and aren't confident. It's one thing knowing what to do. I think it's a whole other kettle of fish how you get people to be confident having these conversations, and there's an education piece that needs urgent, I think, with the current situation to enable people to actually give the support to their employees and to everybody really that people need.
I think that's right. I think we're moving towards kind of a mental health and wellbeing department, or people within an organisation that specialise just in that, I think, because you can't just touch it and then walk away, and it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? It does start from the top. So I think where it's going to change is that there will be a real emphasis on it, and there will be a dedication to it rather than just a piecemeal approach, because you can have a great chat on a Thursday and then on the next Tuesday it starts again. But it does start from the top, you're right.
Just a time check, everyone. We're on 10 to the hour. I want to there's questions, so I want to make sure we've got time to cover those.
Okay, so I'll just take one more call on this, then we'll go to the questions and answers then.
Thank you.
Is anybody else want anything more to say on this slide?
The only thing that I was going to say is that I think if out of this pandemic, one of the things that comes out of it is that it acts as a springboard to get mental welfare, mental health, mental wellness into the public domain and into this continuous conversation in businesses, which it has to be, because I know so many businesses that they'll run a mental health course and then they think it's kind of fixed. We're not plugging gaps. This is on a continuum now. So if this acts as a springboard to getting it out there, then I think we need to draw a huge positive from that, because I don't know what else it's going to take to get this onto the boardroom table and into the discussion with decision makers in organizations.
In my experience, it sometimes it can take somebody on that board that has had mental health problems themselves being able to actually say, look, I'm I'm struggling with this. I've had my struggles in the past. Then they become much more receptive, and then it can filter down to the business. So I think, we need to be brave as managers, as leaders. We need to be brave and say, look, I've had issues. I struggle with it too. Because there's no shame in this. It's actually, you're a bigger person for being open and honest, I think. That's great. So okay, so we're going to move to the questions now. Thank you, Barry, for reminding me. But I can't see the questions, so I'm going to ask you to read them out, Barry, and see what the panel have to say.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks all for a really engaging discussion there. Really, really good stuff. I found myself swept away like being watching the best movie. You forget time. So I had to time check a couple of times there. So we'll just go through a few questions if we may. There's quite a list, but I'll just try and pick out some of the top ones. Hopefully a quick one from Josie. Can you explain what continuous listening is, or what the continuous listening app is? Okay, so it's also AKA, also known as the Happy app, and it's like an app that you say how you're feeling today, what's gone good, what's not been so good. It can be autonomous. It can be you can have your name there, and it's just continuous listening to what's really going on. It's a great thing. We use it a lot in healthcare. A lot of hospitals, trusts in the UK are starting to use it. Having said that, it can be very honest, and it can seem like open up Pandora's box. So you do have to manage it really well. You have to address frustrations. You have to address things rather than, perhaps if you don't know about it, then maybe you don't have to address things so much. But that's continuous listening. It can be something like Yammer or Workplace, the Facebook. That's continuous listening kind of thing. It's in the same space, but it's just always on, always listening to what the employees have to say. Thanks, Paul. The next one from Andy, a rather long one, so I'll read it out. I'm concerned that we will not be able to understand our workforce and their individuals within it well enough in order to design a plan to meet their needs, to provide a work experience that supports their well-being and productivity. Any ideas about how to baseline and monitor?
I'll jump in really quickly. I think it's a mixture of human and tech. I don't think one's enough or one will replace the other. But I'll allow others to articulate that more. But the product you've got here, the emotional analytics, I think is really important. But the qualitative and quantitative data is huge. And yeah, it's about getting to the root causes as quickly as possible. But I'll allow others to speak as well.
I think that point you've just made there is key, qualitative and quantitative. And then you've got, machines who can help us like this, which is brilliant, who helps to give you a baseline for a constant read on your organization. But then also it's individual, so bespoke and broadcast. You've got to have these individual reviews and consistent reviews with people. There's a multitude of things you need to put in place. I think it's multifaceted. You've got to, and the plan means that there's got to be, I don't know, a number of things and technologies and processes that you put into place in the business that will deal with this, and then also that's consistently reviewed to test if it's actually working. So it's a really good point. I think just to pick out a couple of things that you've said about in there, it's that you won't be able to understand the workforce and the individuals within it. I think that's key. Chris, you said it earlier on, it's not a case of managing the team, it's about managing the individuals within the team, isn't it? And to be able to make that differentiation, I think is really key. People just, more so than ever, I think, need to be treated like one person within an organisation, not a group of people in an organisation.
Absolutely, and to that point, I think people-centered is the only way to really get under the skin of this. That being said, you can extrapolate trends, which again, this technology is really good at doing. I think other things that you can do to interrogate the data is, get people to scale things, but then making sure that you're probing into, is my 3 out of 5 the same as your 3 out of 5, and the why and the root causes. Is it a skill gap? Is it a confidence gap? Is it a motivation gap? What do we need to do to get this person to feel as though they are in the right mindset? So again, it's providing tools, not just training, but organizational structures and processes that happen consistently, so people don't feel as though they're being singled out for these conversations. They should be part of any performance conversation that happens, and just making sure that you've got context, and then able to sort of look at trends in the longer term. So yeah, baseline, but then sort of look and see, like the graph that we had earlier on, is it something that affects your team primarily at a certain time of year, or just before lockdown and things like that. So I think people discount qualitative data because it's not as easy as the numbers and the scaling. I think that's useful, but I think contextually getting to the root cause is the only way to really make real change, because if all you've got's a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So you've got to know why these things are recurring so that you can actually solve the problem.
I think a key thing there is ask people and ask them to get involved. We've just done a piece with a business that was really struggling with employee engagement, and they were getting quite sort of disenfranchised workforce. And they said, what should we do? And we were like, well, just ask them what they want, ask them. And so the first thing that they did was to put a huge sort of exercise together where people were giving their ideas. What do they think would make the business better? How are they going to, how would they manage welfare? If there's, and it helped. It was doing the job whilst in real time. Get people involved. People in your organisation have been managing this now for a number of months. They've probably created their own coping strategies. They've probably got hundreds of really good ideas that would help your business to move forwards. And in the same way, at the same time, it will hopefully re-engage people into the business because they feel like they're being listened to.
Thank you. I want to fit in one short question, a bit like at the end of the question time on the TV. We probably have about 30 seconds to answer this, so I'll ask for some very short comments. But this comes from Lucy. Isn't one of the keys in terms of mental health is to help people to feel like they can make choices and therefore have control? I'm hoping managers and leaders will move to more discussion models and joint culture generation rather than temptation to give a model or fix things. Where shall we go with that one? Mel, do you want to talk about that one first?
Absolutely. From a behavioural point of view, people are much more likely to make lasting changes to their behaviour if they feel like they've had some say and there's some input into it. So yes, you can have a framework, and I think that's good from a certain point of view for consistency and to make sure that biases don't affect the way that we treat people within the business. But people-centred is always the way to go.
Superb.
Yeah, for me, well-being or mental health fits within well-being, and it's a culture. You need to have a well-being culture where people can be open and they can be honest. So it's a huge change piece, I think, for a lot of organisations, and focus on prevention rather than cure. You've got different levels of interventions that you can come in with. Tertiary is when you're looking to fix something that's already broken. So you want to look at the primary and secondary interventions that you can put within a business to stop it before it becomes a huge issue.
Right.
Well, look, thank you very much all. Thanks to all the panelists and everyone attending today. And it's relevant that we ended with a mental health theme there. As Paul mentioned, it's a big area that we are putting some investment and time into. And in fact, this webinar is the first of a series of webinars around the employee experience, how to improve that area. And we will be running another webinar to be announced in the next week or two most likely in the new year. And it will be focused on the mental health aspect of helping your employees. So I hope you can all tune into that one too. As I say, more details coming out shortly. We will be sending out a questionnaire in a few days following on from the webinar. We would, as we're a data company, would love to get some feedback from yourselves as to how we can maybe improve, make these events even more valuable and useful to you all. And I'll make sure that along with that questionnaire, you'll get the link to the video so you can review at your will. Should you have any further questions, please do reach out to me, Barry Lloyd. I'll send you my details. I hope you've all got them anyway, as I can reach out to everyone on the call and keep that conversation going. So look, it remains just to say again, once more, thank you to everyone. It's been a fabulous conversation this morning. And thank you for everyone who attended as well. I could see some really good chat going on there. So it's obviously created a lot of thought in your minds. So again, thank you, and we'll hopefully see you all next time.
If I may have just a quick word. Yeah, I'd like to thank the panelists and everybody that attended. And one of the things that I think is most important is we can talk as much as we like about all this stuff, but unless we change something, unless we do something, everything stays the same. So, you know, it's about listening, understanding what's happening and changing something. So for me, that's what it should all be about. But thank you, everybody. And great. Really enjoyed it. Love to see you again sometime.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers. Bye.